Welcome back, everybody, to the Occupy Fantasy Football Podcast, Week 3 edition. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder and co-host here at Occupy Fantasy, joined today, as always, by our NFL writer and my co-host, Chris Rooney. What's up, Chris?
And I'm just glad week two's over with, but we'll get into that in a second here. Happy to be back, obviously.
Dude, yeah, Week 2 was a bloodbath for a lot of fantasy
Yeah.
players. I feel really bad for the players involved. But we're here to help you sort through all the carnage from Week 2, what that means for our DFS lineups for Week 3. We're also going to look ahead and talk about some of the underperforming receivers you should be using, talk about some game stacks, and just some general advice to help build your DFS lineups on FanDuel and DraftKings for Week 3. A quick reminder before we get started, though, our recently released lineup builder is ready for OccupyFantasy.com members in Week 3. Build up to 150 lineups using Occupy model values with Occupy's optimal lineup construction tips. Visit OccupyFantasy.com/lineup builder for more details. All right, Chris, we talked about the carnage. Let's recap some of this Week 2 injury news and the fallout. So I'll name a player that was hurt, and you kind of talk about the fallout. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me, Brian. Let's do it.
All right, Christian McCaffrey, number 1 draft pick in everyone's leagues. High ankle sprain. A lot of injury experts feel that he can beat the 4 to 6 week timetable that the team has listed. But again, that doesn't really matter for us specifically for DFS. We know he's out this week. Mike Davis is the guy that's going to fill in. Curtis Samuel got 4 carries last week, played a hybrid role at Ohio State, and maybe he gets some run. What's your take on this situation for DFS?
It's murky. I mean, they did give Mike Davis 8 targets late in this game last week. After, I think all those or most of those came after CMC could no longer play for them. So, we're being told by people with the team that Mike Davis is their guy. They're confident in him. So I think we have to trust that. We have Carolina, I believe, as a pretty sizable underdog in this game. Yeah, they're 6.5-point underdogs against the Chargers here, who are actually starting their rookie quarterback for the second time. So I don't know if it's the best spot in DFS for Mike Davis. Certainly not in low risk, but they don't really have much behind him on the depth chart. So this is probably going to be the Mike Davis show here for a little bit. He did look good for Seattle a couple years back when he got some starts. So we know he can play.
Yeah, and he's a coaching staff favorite all the time. We talked about this with Peyton Barber in last week's episode, where these guys do the right things, and a lot of the intangibles we can't see, they're showing behind the scenes to the coaching staff. So the coaching staff trust him. He's been trusted by multiple coaching staffs across different teams. So expect him to get the first crack at this job with CMC out. All right, the number 2 overall pick, Saquon Barkley, a more unfortunate injury for him, tore his ACL with some additional damage. So hopefully he's back in time for training camp in 2021, but he is out. And the Giants just recently signed Devonta Freeman. They have Dion Lewis, Wayne Gallman, not to be forgotten either. So it looks like a mess, but what are you expecting for Week 3?
In this first week, I think we can expect more of Dion Lewis and Wayne Gallman. I mean, I think it's a little unrealistic to expect Freeman, who didn't go through any kind of training camp with an NFL team, to just slide right in here on Wednesday and play a ton of snaps on Sunday. I mean, we've definitely seen that before in this league, but I just don't think it's going to happen here. So I think if you're choosing between these 3 guys, it's probably Dion Lewis who is the best. And that's not saying much, because I think that even with all of their injuries, I think a lot of people are expecting San Francisco to be the victorious side here on Sunday in that game. So I'm not sure we want exposure to this situation here, but definitely will be one to watch for Week 4 moving forward, seeing how quickly Freeman gets ramped up.
Yeah, so speaking of their opponent, the San Francisco 49ers just dealing with an insane number of injuries on both sides of the ball. Running back position, Raheem Mostert, one of our top plays last week, busted an 80-yard touchdown run right off the bat, hurts his knee, he's out a couple weeks. His backup, Tevin Coleman, comes in, hurts his knee, he's out for 4 weeks. So now we got at least the 2-headed monster of Jerick McKinnon, Jeff Wilson. JaMychal Hasty called up off the practice squad, so perhaps a 3-headed approach here. And then at quarterback, Jimmy G, high ankle sprain. probably on the doubtful side of things this week. If he can't go, Nick Mullins will draw the start. So, we've been talking about McKinnon and Wilson on in our staff chat, and it's only Wednesday, and we still have a few more days until the slate starts. So I want to hear your thoughts. Let the people know about. It sounds like you think McKinnon's one of the best plays of the week, at least what we know so far.
I just think he's the best athlete in this backfield, at least that I'm aware of. I'm certainly fine if anybody wants to jump into the comments on our podcast here on YouTube or reply to us on Twitter when this gets posted with your own thoughts. But McKinnon was one of the most explosive running back prospects of his draft class, probably one of the most explosive prospects of the last few years. Now, I mean, he's never really had a full workload over, a full 16-game NFL season, and he's coming off of back-to-back kind of devastating knee injuries since he signed with the Niners. So I think coupled with concerns that the Niners have already expressed as an organization, Brian, about the quality of the turf at MetLife Field, we're going to really have to pay attention to what they say about the running backs here. But at a super cheap price on both sites this weekend, I think McKinnon is in a good spot to hit value for us, especially in low-risk formats. So I'm really interested in what he's going to be able to do here. He was already very involved in the red zone when all these running backs were healthy. So hopefully he retains that role here. And then with Mullins, he kind of statistically looks pretty close as far as data and performance goes to what Jimmy actually gave this team since he was acquired. So, maybe there's not too much of a drop off there, at least against a subpar opponent like the Giants.
For sure. And we can actually look back to week 2 and week 3 of last season when Tevin Coleman was out. Raheem Mostert was still getting his feet under him as a running back in this system. And it was Matt Breida and Jeff Wilson who kind of saw a similar split. Wilson was used as the goal line back then. And I think we could see some similar stat lines here over the next couple of weeks with Mostert and Coleman out, where in week 2, Wilson last year went 10 carries, 34 yards, 2 touchdowns. The following week, 8 carries, 18 yards, 2 touchdowns, kind of a red zone specialist, maybe between the 20s on some early down work. But we should see a split. And again, if we were happy to play Mostert and potentially Coleman in this type of game environment, we're probably likely to at least play McKinnon and maybe Jeff Wilson if you're playing super big tournaments, or at least see how it plays out after this week. So, all right, moving on. The Denver Broncos also got hit with some injuries, already without Von Miller to start the season. Now their franchise quarterback Drew Lock dealing with a shoulder injury. Jeff Driscoll, the entertaining backup veteran, is filling in for him. And then unfortunately, Courtland Sutton tore his ACL. He's out for the season, but it does give some more run to our favorite, KJ Hamler.
Yes, sir. And they are talking about giving KJ more work now that role is fully open for them in the receiving corps. So definitely excited to see what the Penn State product can do for them here moving forward. Brian, I thought I was done talking about Jeff Driscoll. I got a lot of questions about him last year when he made some starts for, I think it was Detroit, after Matt Stafford went down with his back injury last year. So, this is a guy with NFL game experience. It is a tough matchup against the Buccaneers here in week 3. So I don't know. We'll get into this in a second. With the way the salaries are here in week 3, I really don't think we need to punt at quarterback. I think we want to pay up. So I'm not really interested in Driscoll, but we definitely want to see what he's able to do because we're going to need him to obviously be effective for these receivers to be effective for us.
Yeah, exactly. And Hamler used all over the field in relief in week 2, led the team in air yards, big play threat. So again, he's minimum price this week, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, that's right. He's minimum price on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So it isn't going to take much for him to return that investment, so to speak.
Yeah, certainly an interesting play, especially in tournament format. So I like that for KJ Hamler. All right, a couple guys we should keep our eyes on. Do any of these guys in particular worry you for week 3? Julio Jones dealt with some hamstring tightness in and out of the game. He didn't practice as of Wednesday. Devontae Adams, literally the exact same situation. He just didn't have a hamstring injury before the week started like Julio did. Will Fuller, surprise, hamstring injury. I think he practiced today, though, on Wednesday. We'll see how that goes. And then Sammy Watkins, concussion, or at least concussion-like symptoms, left the game early on Sunday. Thoughts on these guys and how worried are we?
Yeah, well, I mean, Sammy Watkins always tweeting about how aliens are taking over his brain. So I really don't know if when they run the concussion tests on Sammy Watkins, I don't know if they can tell how he's functioning normally versus that. Anyway, both Watkins and Devontae Adams. So those are showdown slates this week. So Devontae Sunday Night Football with the Packers against the Saints, and then Watkins with the big Monday night millionaire slate on DraftKings, Brian, for the Chiefs and the Ravens. So I know this is more of a main slate show, but for anybody listening, I mean, definitely make sure you check out Brian's podcast he's doing with Daily Roto's Colin Drew to talk about those slates. I mean, that's going to be some fun stuff here. I'm most concerned about Julio for Sunday, Brian. It sounds like, we've heard for years in his career that he's been limited in practice. He nurses injuries, and they give him those veteran maintenance days to keep him healthy on Sundays. And I think that's what we were expecting here through the first couple of weeks of the season with Julio. But, we have a couple of weeks in a row now where Atlanta's playing in these absolute shootouts. And at least in week 2, he did not even come close to meeting expectation based on how that game went down. Dropped a long touchdown pass. Didn't look like he had the exact same type of burst and explosive speed that we're used to seeing from Julio. I'm really interested in whether or not he's active on Sunday, because I already, who doesn't at this point, like Calvin Ridley. But without Julio, Ridley at his super affordable price on this slate almost becomes the closest thing to a lock you have in cash games at receiver.
Yeah, and Ridley's already leading the league in air yards and touchdowns. Add in the fact that Julio might be out, even more of a slam dunk play. And yeah, this doesn't feel like your typical rest day for Julio, just based on how he looks, some of the comments. I would trend towards him not playing this week. But again, we are recording this Wednesday, so we'll see how the week develops as we go on. All right, let's talk about the Week 3 betting market. We like to get a high-level look at these teams and the spots they're in before drilling down to the individual player level. So some of the biggest spreads this week, and a lot of times we like to look at these spreads for big favorites, to look at the running backs to use, especially in our low-risk lineups. And then, of course, teams and game stacks. So Indianapolis is an 11-point favorite against the Jets. The Browns are 7.5-point favorites over the Washington football team. New England, if you saw Bill Belichick's image today, ready to go for Week 3, quick turnaround time. They're 6.5-point favorites over the Vegas Raiders. Eagles 6.5-point favorites over the Bengals, and then the Chargers 6.5-point favorites over the cross-country traveling Panthers. So, thoughts on these teams, the running backs, in the big favorite spots?
First thing that jumps out to me here is that we should be rostering Jonathan Taylor again, Brian. I mean, an 11-point favorite against the Jets. We saw the amount of touches that he got in week 2. I mean, the amount of touches he just got in the first half in week 2 was crazy. So,
didn't he start with like 12 straight touches or something crazy, right?
Yeah, like it was absolutely just bananas how much they're using this guy. Complete shift from week 1. Now I know Mac was there in week 1, but if we're going to see those types of game plans from the Colts, and honestly, I mean, we know a lot about Phillip Rivers, right? I mean, we've watched him play football for years. The Colts at this point might feel like their best path to victory is play it safe and run Jonathan Taylor, and to a lesser degree Nyheim Hines into the ground. So with an 11-point favorite status, we should see Taylor have an amazing day here. Cleveland at 7.5, getting a touchdown, a little over that 7.5. I'm a little more concerned about that spot. There's two things there, Brian. Obviously, it's Chubb and Hunt. They do have a little bit of a split workload. And one of the things that Washington football team has actually been good at this year is stopping the run. So as much as it is a great spot looking at the betting markets, the totals, and the spread here, this is one of the tougher matchups for running backs that are favored this week. So I'm not sure I'm going to be looking to Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt in low risk this week.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, again, they've sold out the stop to run the first 2 games. They let Kyler Murray and everyone else just run wild and just stopped Kenyon Drake. It didn't work from a game plan perspective for winning the game, but maybe they try to do that again here in week 3, force Baker to beat them. The best spot probably, and you and I have talked about off air, is Miles Sanders here. 6.5-point favorites against Cincinnati. Saw no reduction in his workload in week 2, his first start of the season, based on where he was looking last year. Right. Thought maybe he might be eased in with his soft tissue injury. Not the case.
No, I mean, they gave him 7 targets, 20 carries, I think, in a game that they were ended up losing by 18 points. So it doesn't get much more game script proof than that if he's going to get that kind of work. And obviously seeing all the injuries for Philadelphia stacking up again at receiver position, it just, to me, screams that we should be playing Sanders here. A favorite against a Bengals defense that hasn't looked particularly good. And I think they just really made a mistake with Sanders' price here, Brian.
Yeah. I don't get it. He's what, 6,400, 6,700 on DraftKings.
Yeah,
It doesn't make any
64 on
sense.
DraftKings, 74 on FanDuel. I mean, he's a slam dunk play at those levels here. With running backs and these spreads, I mean, we definitely want to talk about the Chargers here in a second, but I think it's a fool's errand, Brian, right now, the way they're using their players with New England to try and play one of these running backs, Michelle or Burkhead or James White when he's back after kind of missing the last game, because it's kind of the Cam Newton show, right?
Just play Cam Newton as your low
Yeah.
risk quarterback. He's going to get
Yeah.
does he I think he leads the league in goal line rush attempts at this point. If you look at the way they're using him, very high value fantasy situations. And if it comes down to it, they're throwing the ball to him, and he looked amazing throwing the ball on Sunday night. So again, Cam Newton in a fantastic spot, especially as your low risk quarterback.
Absolutely. All right. Why don't we move on to some of the highest totals on this slate? A little different than obviously just looking at the spreads. I think the game everyone's going to concentrate on with their game stacks is the one at the top of the board here. It is the Seahawks and the Cowboys. It's a 55.5 point total. Next on our list here is the Arizona Cardinals and the Detroit Lions at 54.5. And then we have a decent drop off to the rest of the games that we're looking at on this slate. We have Tennessee and Minnesota at 48.5. And then we have two games at 47.5. And that would be the Falcons and the Bears and the Bills and the Rams. So, I mean, I guess other than the obvious, we've made the joke several times back and forth that the Seattle-Dallas games total probably is still too low. But what else stands out to you here in this group, Brian?
What stands out to me is I'm going to rearrange our show notes here a little bit. Now, obviously, we're going to look to stack Seattle and Dallas in our high-risk contest, FanDuel DraftKings, 55.5 point total. Arizona, Detroit's on the list as well. I mean, lots of fantasy-friendly options on both sides. Yep. What stands out to me is you listed two game stacks, and I'm deferring to you for eternity now after you've nailed the top two scoring game stacks through 2 weeks so far this season. You have a couple stacks that aren't listed in these high total games, notably Cincinnati and Philadelphia, and then Pittsburgh and Houston as some of your top target stacks this week. Now, you'll write these up extensively in the Daily Plug at OccupyFantasy.com. But I'm kind of curious to see your thoughts on why those two games stuck out in particular as games we should be stacking in tournaments.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive into that. The biggest thing with the Bengals and the Eagles here is these are two super underperforming passing games, ranked 31st and 32nd respectively in the league in terms of yards per attempt with their quarterbacks. But they're not playing in such a way that they're not trying to score points quickly. A ton of the underperforming, well, quote unquote, underperforming wide receivers, we don't feel like we have enough data to call them that yet, are from both of these teams. And that's because these quarterbacks are pushing the ball downfield. The opportunities are just not turning into fantasy points, not turning into touchdowns for their teams. So, if that perfect storm comes together in this head-to-head matchup for AJ Green, for Desean Jackson, it could turn into a very, very nice game to have exposure to in your DFS lineups. The other one that I'm looking at that we didn't mention, I believe, is the Steelers and the Texans. Big Ben, Brian, has looked really good in his return. I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I feel like through 2 weeks, I was skeptical coming into the year, but I'm comfortable again with Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, he looks like the guy that we were used to seeing before his injury. And then we all know what Deshaun Watson can do. It'll be interesting to see if they actually throw the ball to Will Fuller this week. But I just think that we have the potential with concentrated volume of targets in these offenses between Fuller and Brandon Cooks on the Houston side, with a little bit of Jordan Akins at tight end and David Johnson as really the only viable running back. And then on the Pittsburgh side, I mean, they went right back to James Conner in week 2, so he looks like he's good to go again. And Deontay Johnson actually looks like he's a little more intriguing to me than Juju right now, the way he's being used. So I could definitely see this game outperforming its 45.5 point total that we're seeing in betting markets right now.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Even if it comes close to the 45 point total, the fantasy scoring should be concentrated on a couple of guys, which is all we need for game stacks. Even if it only hits the 45 point total or even slightly underperforms, if the guys get there, they get there through a correlated game script. So love those calls too. So you mentioned AJ Green. You mentioned Desean Jackson. Beautiful transition here as they top the list of our air yard underperformers through 2 weeks of the season. AJ Green, if you watched the Thursday night game against the Browns, I mean, you saw the crazy number of targets he was getting. You saw him look like a geriatric old man getting up after each incompletion. And there's a lot of discussion on the Twitter machine about Do we weigh the air yards that he's getting versus how poor he looks? And again, we're data driven. I think we're both going to lean towards just playing him. Desean Jackson finally got on the score sheet last week. He's expected to have scored 37 fantasy points so far. He's only scored about 19 or 20. There's a couple other guys on this list that we should, again, not incredibly predictive yet, but still guys we should be targeting for week 3.
Yeah, just going back to AJ Green for a minute here. I mean, looking at next gen stats, Brian. I mean, Joe Burrow, believe it or not, he is trying to push this ball down the field. I mean, watching that game on Thursday should have been enough evidence for people to understand that, but his average kind of intended air yards on his pass attempts is 8.6, but he's only completing an average of 4.9. I mean, there are a couple quarterbacks that are underperforming their air yards by more than 3 yards per attempt, but I mean, no one to the same degree that Burrow is really that is going to be active here on Sunday that we're going to be looking at. So, I feel like those opportunities will start to convert for the Bengals because I just don't see Burrow changing his play style. I'm really interested in DJ Moore on Sunday with Carolina. I feel like that they're going to unleash the passing game. I know we just talked about Mike Davis, Brian, but I just don't see a realistic path to them having success here over the next few weeks without leaning on their super talented receivers. And why not more DJ Moore? I mean, Robbie Anderson has already sort of shown that he is developed good chemistry with Teddy Bridgewater here, but it's DJ Moore that actually has been underperforming his. Oh, well, there you go. Apparently, I'm a wanted man here. DJ Moore is going to be highly targeted once again against the Chargers, has an excellent matchup, and he is on our list here of air yard leaders who haven't fully realized all their opportunity to perform.
Yeah, and he's actually in one of the best types of spots for underperformers. It's when a guy who is getting opportunities through the air in the passing game, and in a subsequent week, he has a teammate go down to injury. So not only has he been underperforming, now he's in line for even more opportunity than he's been getting. So you have DJ Moore with Christian McCaffrey, who obviously commands a lot of attention. You have Tim Patrick and Jerry Jeudy, who are on this list as well. Cortland Sutton is down, so now they're thrust into even more prominent roles. And then let's not forget about T.Y. Hilton either, who wouldn't even be on this list if he didn't drop a 45-yard touchdown pass last week. But now, rookie or second-year sensation Paris Campbell, unfortunately injured once again. He's out. He was leading the team in targets before he was injured, and now T.Y. Hilton should be getting even more as the number one. The best situation, and maybe I'm biased because this happened to me last year, was Chris Conley, where he was underperforming. Then I think it was Chark was out for a week, and Conley was on this list, got even more targets, helped someone here win $250K down in Puerto Rico. So maybe I'm a little biased, but these types of plays are really, really good spots in tournaments.
Absolutely, and both these Broncos receivers here, Jeudy and Patrick, and we already touched on KJ Hamler a little bit, even though he's not popping on this list because he's only played one game. I mean, they're all super affordable this week. Patrick, 3,700 on DraftKings, 46 FanDuel. We already told you Hamler's at the minimums, and then Jeudy himself is still only 5K, 5,300 between DraftKings, FanDuel. So a lot of good opportunity there to get a pretty affordable receiver into your tournament lineups that has the upside based off of some real data that actually pushes us towards considering them. We're not just drawing these names out of a hat, So I like that call a lot.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about AJ Green. He actually leads the entire league in air yards, which is pretty nutty, right? That's 338 air yards. He only has 80 real receiving yards. As far as guys who are on this top 20 list of air yards through 2 weeks, guys we haven't mentioned as underperformers, any of the other ones here on this list stand out for any reason whatsoever?
Adam Thielen jumps out to me. I mean, Minnesota is not a team that has actually, Vikings fans don't need me to tell them this, but has not exactly thrown the ball a lot through 2 weeks. But when they do throw the ball, it's basically only to Adam Thielen. Yep. So even though it's a low volume passing attack, we're going to want, I think, exposure to him in tournaments this week, maybe even in low risk. I mean, it's just super interesting opportunity with a guy who's getting I don't want to say all because nobody's getting all of the air yards for their team, but he's one of these few guys on this list who's actually getting like over 50%, in that neighborhood. I don't actually have the table in front of me, but when I was looking at it earlier, that's definitely what it looked like. And then talked about it with Julio, who is also on this list. He and his teammate Calvin Ridley, both in the top 6, it looks like, for air yards in the NFL. You take Julio away, I mean, it just solidifies Ridley's floor. He may not get, a large bump in terms of overall targets because his volume is already just so incredible, but it makes it that much easier for Matt Ryan to just simply go his way. And that's what we're looking for in terms of safe receiver plays, especially in a week here where none of the running backs that we're looking at in low risk, especially, are going to cost you more than 8,300, which is Ezekiel Elliott. We can afford to pay up for some of the best receivers in the league this week in our low risk lineups. Guys like Calvin Ridley, Adam Thielen, and then actually scanning the list here a little further down, we even got Allen Robinson, who's going to be playing against these pass heavy Falcons. Maybe that'll lift him up towards the top of the leaderboards here in week 3 as well.
And as we look to the occupied model, which has been updated for week 3, we look at the preliminary projected target leaders, and A-Rob is actually top of the list for the main slate, 10.9 projected targets. A.J. Green right behind him. DJ Moore we've already mentioned. Odell Beckham we haven't talked about, but he's also kind of been underperforming despite catching the touchdown last week. Then Adam Thielen, all these guys projected for 9.5 targets or more. So again, high volume, high value targets. I mean, all these guys look like great plays.
Yeah, and not popping on the list because if we just think about how the games shook out over the first couple of weeks, I'm kind of interested in Julian Edelman, Brian. Well, actually, he is on the list. I need to learn how to read better. He's right here next to Allen Robinson, actually. So overlooking the unsexy receiver who helped one person here, not me, win $1 million about 18 months ago. So pardon me for ignoring Jules, Brian. I'm sure he's near and dear to your heart. Had a ton of the opportunity with the Patriots against the Seahawks last Sunday night, set a career high for receiving yardage in a game. And I think we got a lot more confidence after week 2 that Cam is going to be able to sling the ball around the yard with these Patriots. And Julian Edelman is still the man in that offense. So another player who's pretty safely going to see a lot of targets for the Patriots against the Raiders this week and isn't a bad low risk play at all.
Cool. And before we get out of here, I do want to move to the tight end position really quickly. You've been tracking routes run. Yeah, routes run. Yeah, however you say that. It is still the Logan Thomas show, guys. I know that we didn't get the value we wanted out of him in week 2, but thankfully that means his DFS price is held in check here and going into his matchup against the Browns. And he, in week 2, was only second to Travis Kelce in terms of percentage of, we're going to go with routes run. Maybe I'll say routes run this time. Let's see how many variations we can get in the next minute.
Yeah. Logan Thomas with basically running a route on virtually 100% of Haskins dropbacks. What more can you ask for out of a low risk tight end if you're punting at a position here in DFS, even in tournaments for that matter? And the Browns actually are one of the better matchups this week against tight ends. They are in the bottom half of the league by Football Outsiders DVOA, which is a statistic I know I'm personally addicted to. I like seeing that a lot. Right below him is Houston's Jordan Akins, playing very, very well through the last couple of weeks of the season, the only 2 weeks of the season. He's third on this list right behind Logan Thomas. Someone that maybe could be the initial beneficiary in Denver, who we didn't touch on, is Noah Fant. He's one of the leaders at the position, and obviously without Sutton out there, they may continue to lean on him. And Jimmy Graham. I mean, I know it's not fun. It's not sexy to talk about these old-ass tight ends, Brian, but Jimmy Graham is looking like one of the best players on the Chicago Bears. And he, again, another matchup with those Falcons. And we did just see what Dallas's Dalton Schultz did in his first start of the season last week against the Falcons. So it's not unreasonable to expect Jimmy Graham to have a good game this week as well.
Yeah, I mean, Graham ran a route, run to route. There we go. I'm trying to get as many as I can on 80% of Trubisky's dropbacks. And this is a team that deactivated Ted Ginn, kind of demoted Anthony Miller. He was only in there for 40% of the snaps. Something named Darnell Mooney is the number 2 receiver there now. So now Jimmy Graham by default is getting just a lot of. He didn't get a lot of targets last week, but he's running out there once you're basically dropping back to pass. So I don't hate that at all. And the thing about Fant, Akins, those are 2 guys in game stacks that we've already hit on that you could potentially use as a tight end position, underpriced for their role. So really like those calls. All right, that'll do it for this show. Appreciate everyone tuning in as always. Go ahead and click that subscribe button, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to this in your favorite podcast app. We always appreciate that. And also let you know when our latest episodes are released. We do these fantasy football podcasts every Wednesday evening. Hit your feed pretty shortly thereafter. And OccupyFantasy.com is where you can check Chris's work, the NFL Daily Plug every week. You can get access to our Occupy model, which ranks every single player on the slate for FanDuel and DraftKings. So for Chris Rooney, I'm Brian Jester. Thanks again for listening. Good luck this week, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.